It's fairly informal. There's a little bit of work for you to do as well, though it's not like being back in school, or at least I hope not too much. I'm just going to provide an update on where we're at, what we've got coming up, and where we've come from. We have a framework that has come together over a couple of years' work, and these are the five sort of key broad aims. For the purposes of this morning, we're focusing primarily on 2 and 3. The purpose of that being, well, one, there's only so much we can squeeze into one morning, but number one, I think, has been fairly, or more than fairly, has been covered through the last couple of years in terms of the expert panel that came together, which I'll explain a bit more about, consultation on this draft framework, and I'll drop a couple of links to that online into the chat in due course. Later in the month, we have an event in Newport, which I'll return to and explain a bit more about towards the end. That's the opportunity where we'll be spending a little bit more time looking at sort of 4 and 5 and fleshing these out. I say focusing on them, they are all clearly interrelated as well, and a lot of this stuff kind of, a lot of themes run through all of these key aims, but just to kind of put some parameters around it, we're looking at 2 and 3 today, 4 and 5 towards the end of the month. And number 2 is understanding significance and relevance, sporting heritage, through a participatory approach, and that P word is really, really important. It explains one of the reasons why you've all been invited this morning, while we're going to be asking you to, as I say, do a little bit of work. And then the third aim is supporting the physical and the digital preservation of sporting heritage. I think it's fair to say as well, and this work has been supported by Welsh Government. We're looking, I guess, and Justine, correct me if I'm wrong here, a sort of like a timeline really of the next 2 years primarily, and very much a focus on delivery and the practical aspects of what we can achieve over that period of time, that 2 years.
Yeah, that's right, Russell. Yeah, it's very much trying to ensure that the outputs that came together through the strategic framework, which is aiming to make a real celebration of Welsh sporting heritage, but also try and support the development and understanding of it in the broadest sense. So yeah, we're aiming to deliver the framework by March 25, but that will by no means be the end of the work that needs to happen. Back to you, Russ.
Sure, thanks, Justine. Okay, so just dropping links to the framework. That is the Welsh. Here is the English language version, both available on the Sporting Heritage website, sportingheritage.org.uk. So, okay, let me. Okay, so yeah, I'll do this bit in Welsh. Nôl yn 2018, cafodd astudiaeth ddichonoldeb ei gyhoeddi, ac un o'r gymellion yn yr astudiaeth yna oedd i sefydlu panel arbenigol ar gyfer Treftadaeth Chwaraeon Cymru, ac oedd Llywodraeth Cymru tu ôl yr astudiaeth yna, o'n nhw'n cefnogi y panel yna, ac mi'n gallu cofio cael cwbl o sgyrsiau gyda Justine ar wawr y pandemig, nôl yn 2000, yn hwyr 2019, yn gynnar 2020, pan o'n i'n sôn am sut i animeiddio'r panel, sut i hwyluso fe, pwy i fod yn y panel a pethau fel yna. Ac wrth gwrs, o'n i ddim yn siŵr beth oedd yn dod ynglyn â'r pandemig, ac felly oedd rhaid i wneud pethau ar-lein yn rhithrol ar y cyfan. Ond oedd yna lot o bobl, mae cwbl o bobl y bore yma sydd wedi ymuno ni hefyd, oedd yn cyfrannu at y panel yna, ac daeth i gilydd cwbl o weithiau, 3, falle 4 o weithiau dros gyfnod o flwyddyn i ddarlunio fframwaith drafft sydd gyda chi nawr tu ôl y ddyleni yna. Cafodd ei ymgynghori yn gyhoeddus a gyda'r sector hefyd. Wnaethon ni diweddaru y fframwaith ar ôl clywed be mae pobl yn dweud am hynny, a wedyn derbyniwyd y fframwaith strategol drafft gan Lywodraeth Cymru tua flwyddyn yn ôl. Ers hynny, mae Sporting Heritage wedi bod yn cario ymlaen gyda'i gwaith ledled Prydain. Rydyn ni wedi bod yn gweithio yn yr Alban, Gogledd Iwerddon a Lloegr. Wedi bod yn neud tipyn bach fan hyn hefyd, ond o'n i wedi bod yn aros i i gyflawni ac yn gyrru ymlaen y fframwaith ac yn cyrraedd allan hefyd, estyn allan i'r mewn y sector. Ddim yn unig y sector proffesiynol treftadaeth, ond i hwnt hynny, sef y clybiau, cymdeithasau lleol, cyrff llywodraethu, ddim yn unig y sector proffesiynol, sef yr amgueddfeydd a'r achifdau. Ac so felly hyd at heddi, mae Llywodraeth Cymru, fel o'n i'n dweud, wedi cyfnogi yr gwaith, yn ariannu'r gwaith yn ystod y cyfnod hon. Mae rhaid cael ei orffen ar ddiwedd y mis, ond fel o'n i'n dweud, dyn ni'n edrych ar amserlen dros o hyd at y 2 flynedd nesaf. A mae yna sawl elfennau. Ni'n sôn am delivery, sef cyflawniad, cynlluniau cyflawni hefyd, sef pethau practegol, pethau gweithredol. Rydyn ni'n edrych hefyd ar bethau digidol yn ystod y fframwaith. A mae Fran nes ymlaen yn sôn tipyn bach am waith digidol. Mae Laura Cotton o Archif Morgannwg yn ymuno ni nes ymlaen hefyd i sôn am y prosiect sydd ar y gorwel hefyd ynglyn â'r pethau digidol. Mae yna elfen eitha fach, ond yn bwysig, sef y panel ymchwil ar gyfer rheini sydd gan ddiddordeb academaidd mewn treftadaeth chwaraeon, a mae hwn yn cyfarfod am y tro cyntaf tuag at diwedd y mis. 11 ar 20 y mis Mawrth, fi'n meddwl, a mae yna manylion hyn ar gael os oes diddordeb gyda chi mewn ymchwil academaidd ar treftadaeth chwaraeon. Rydyn ni'n edrych ar pethau ynglyn â'r gweithlu, sef anghenion a cefnogaeth y gweithlu. Mae Fran yn arwain ar pethau ynglyn â'r gweithlu a datblygiad gweithlu ledled Prydain, a mae'r gwaith yng Nghymru'n bwyd y mewn i'r gwaith yna. Rydyn ni'n edrych ar tipyn bach ar gweithlu yn y sesiwn nesaf yn Casnewydd ar ddiwedd y mis. Mae gennym ni arddangosfa ar-lein yn digwydd ar ddiwedd y mis hefyd, ac mae mwy o fanylion am hynny tuag at diwedd y bore yma hefyd. A mae gennym ni lot o bethau, lot o eitemau wedi cael eu awgrymu yn nominaeddio ar gyfer hynny o flaen llaw. A rydyn ni'n sôn am casgliadau, sef arolwg a'r casgliadau yng Nghymru hefyd. Cyn bo hir, na i jyst rhoi tipyn bach o flas o be mae'r arolwg wedi dweud, sef mae data yn dweud hyd yn hyn. Mae'r arolwg ar gau ar ddiwedd fori, so mae yna galwad ola i chi ac eich rhwydweithiau. Os mae rhywun, os ti'n nabod unrhyw sydd wedi dangos diddordeb yn yr arolwg neu falle sydd gan gasgliad, dyn ni eisiau clywed ohonyn nhw yn yr arolwg. Unrhyw cwestiwn, any questions on any of that? Bit of a whistle stop.
Hi, could I just ask, is it possible to extend the completion of the survey online?
I don't see why not.
I'll tell you why. We've got quite a significant collection here in Pontypool. We've got the Pontypool Rugby Football Club collection, but the museum has actually been closed a couple of days this week. So it's not been possible for me to get in and actually provide the summary collection information for you. That's why I'm asking if it can be extended.
Yeah, I had a call, sorry, an email I picked up first thing this morning. There's a governing body that would like to add to it, and I think they've had a couple of capacity issues as well. So yeah, I don't see that as a problem. I don't think we'll necessarily be advertising that it's still open because we need a bit of time to get all the data crunched and things. But yeah, I'm sure that's fine, Jane.
Yeah, just to add, yeah. So the survey, the reason why it's quite quick is that it's in this little bit of funding that's come from the Welsh Government that finishes at the end of the month. But the aim of the collection survey is to give us a bit of a grounding for the big piece of work that comes in the next phase. So absolutely fine for us to keep it open and hopefully be able to include your results within this bit of reporting. But if not, it will still be crucial for the next phase of development.
I would anticipate that we'd be able to complete it next Thursday when we're all in together and can do that. Thank you.
on mute. Really grateful for you taking an interest, Jane. We want it to reach those sorts of collections, and I think it's fair to say that well, I may as well start my bit on the survey data already, but I think it's fair to say that it's already the best sort of response in Wales to a survey of this nature. I'm reliably told, Justine, anyway. So we're really grateful for that. Okay, so hopefully you can see a pie chart. Diolch o galon. Thank you very much for everybody who has completed it. As I said, this is just a very, very quick potted overview of what it's telling us, or what you're telling us about collections. So fel byddwch chi'n gweld, mae achifdau ac amgueddfeydd yn cyfri am y mwyafrif o atebwyr. Bydd hwn ddim yn syndod, ond mae'n anogl am bod ni wedi clywed oddi wrth clybiau hefyd, ymhlith rheini sydd wedi nodi arall yn yr arolwg. Mae gyda ni wasanaethau amgueddfa o fewn mudiadau, sef efallai ymddiriedolaethau hamdden, lle mae gwasanaethau amgueddfa falle'n sefydlu neu'n eistedd y dyddiau hyn mewn ardaloedd. A mae unigolion hefyd wedi ymateb sydd yn galonogol hefyd. Slide nesaf. Fydd ddim yn syndod eto i chi weld bod y mwyafrif o atebwyr mae gyda nhw casgliadau, Treftadaeth Chwaraeon, ystalwm mewn arolygon fel hwn, mae Sporting Heritage wedi bod yn gofyn cwestiynau am amrywiadoldeb, sef Treftadaeth Cudd, so air quotes, hynny yw y casgliadau am chwaraeon nabl, efallai Treftadaeth Chwaraeon Menywod, LGBTQ+, ac yn y blaen. A mae yna dipyn dros chwater o atebwyr sydd gan casgliadau penodol am y grwpiau hynny. Ac fi'n siŵr bod ni'n car ymlaen, parhau gofyn cwestiynau ac yn sôn am y pynciau hyn dros y flynyddoedd i ddod. Fformat o gasgliadau. Eto, fydd o ddim yn dod fel syndod i chi fod ffotograffau, deunydd archif yn cyfri am lot o gynnwys casgliadau yng Nghymru. Gan ddeunydd archif, rydyn ni'n cyfeirio at pethau fel papurau gweinyddol, clybiau, cofnodion ariannol, enghraifft, ond mae'r data'n awgrymu bod yna amrywiaeth eang o bethau yng Nghymru, megis tlysau medalau, dillad a chit, cylchgronau, llyfrau, cofnodolion, ac roedd yna cyfeiriad hefyd at wefannau sydd yn ddiddorol achos ei fod yn adlewyrchu bod yna treftadaeth ddigidol i fod yn ymwybodol ohoni, ac fe fyddwn ni'n clywed yn fwy am waith cadwriaeth ddigidol sydd ar y gorwel yng Nghymru nes ymlaen y bore yma fel o'n i'n dweud. So mae'r amrywiaeth eang o gasgliadau, sef cynnwys y gasgliadau. Catalogio. Gofynnwn ni'n cwestiwn am catalogio. Dim ond tipyn dros chwater alla ddweud bod eu casgliadau wedi eu catalogio'n llawn. Mae efallai sort of rhan catalogio hefyd ymddengys cael ei wneud. Ond mae yna portion eitha bach, ond arwyddocheol sydd ddim wedi catalogio pethau hyd yn hyn. Dyn ni ddim wedi gofyn yn fanwl pam, neu beth yw'r rhwystrau neu pethau fel yna, ond mae tipyn bach o waith i wneud ynglyn â catalogio efallai ynglyn â'r data. Mae'n gysurlon iawn i glywed bod atebwyr yn teimlo nad yw casgliadau ddim mewn perygl, sydd yn galonogol. Lot o bobl yn eitha siŵr bod nhw ddim mewn perygl. Math o gyflwr hefyd, dyn ni'n gofyn i bobl i ddisgrifio math o gyflwr sydd gan eu casgliadau. Rydyn ni wedi gofyn iddyn nhw i ddweud, i ddisgrifio fe o 10 lan i wych, ac unwaith eto mae'n galonogol fod neb wedi dweud llai na gymysg yn yr arolwg. Yn ola, fi'n meddwl, mae'n a lot mwy o ddata eraill yn yr arolwg, ac byddwn ni'n clywed, mae'n a couple o bobl o hyd i cyflawni fe hefyd, ond am y tro, y bore yma, rydyn ni wedi gofyn am ba fath o wybodaeth fydd o werth i bobl a neu fudiadau, a mae gweithio mewn partneriaethau a gweithio gyda partnerau yw'r ardal mwy o poblogaidd ymhlith yr atebion. Un reswm arall pan ydyn ni'n uchelgeisio tynnu clybiau a chymdeithasau yn fwy agos at ymgyddfeydd a chifdau hefyd, ac yn creu tipyn bach mwy o'r cydweithrediad rhwng y ddau. Fel y gallwch chi weld, mae pobl eisiau mwy o wybodaeth am godi arian, gweinyddu benthyciadau o gasgliadau a chyngor ar sut i ddangos casgliadau hefyd. So felly, dyna drosolwg cyflym. Mae un diwrnod i fynd, fel o'n i'n dweud, tan mae'n cau, ond dyn ni'n hapus i estyn yr olwg os mae'n helpu pobl cyflawni fe. Unrhyw cwestiynau cyflym sydd gan pawb? Dyna'r diwedd y sleidiau. Mae'n lot o ddata arall i fynd trwodd, ond just fel trosolwg, dyna beth o'n i'n meddwl, just helpu animeiddio pethau a rhoi dim bach o flas i chi beth mae pobl wedi dweud yn yr olwg. So a couple of questions. Nick, is this an updated survey to the one done at the end of 2021? 2021 is a bit more before my time, Justine. I'd have to defer to you on that one. There's data from something done last year, I think.
Yes, it is, Nick. It's updated from what we started last year. We were working with, I can't see you on the screen. There you are. Yeah, when we were working with the Football Museum to review some of that data as well. And I've just responded to you as well, Dave. Oh, thank you.
Thanks very much. We'll get it done over the next few days.
I'm very grateful to have the company of Jennifer Cragg this morning, calling in from Cheshire, from Headland Design Associates. She's going to do provide a short overview of the significance toolkit, significance model. Some people might be familiar with this already. We had a sense that a few people are a little bit new to this, however. So, Jennifer, I'll hand over to you. We're going to be breaking into some groups. There's some questions to put to you. It'll all be done sort of automatically in the breakout. And we'll have the facilitators, myself, Jamie, Fran, and Justine. But I'll hand over to Jennifer. I can't see on my screen. I trust you're still there.
Yeah.
There we are.
I'll just share. Okay, bore da pawb. I'm a Welsh learner, but sadly nowhere near able to give a talk in Welsh just yet. So that's the limit this morning, I'm afraid. So as Russell said, my name's Jennifer Cragg and I work as a heritage consultant for a company called Headland Design Associates. We're based on the Welsh Cheshire border and we work with museums, galleries and heritage sites across the UK on collections projects, consultation and community engagement, interpretive and activity planning, exhibition design and installation, graphic design, funding applications and learning resources, so a whole range of things. A high percentage of our work is in Wales, so we have a good grounding in the Welsh cultural sector and some of our team members are Welsh as well. And we've worked with colleagues across Wales on a range of different projects. So my background is in collections management and curation, working with multidisciplinary collections across different types of organisations. And last year, we were appointed by Welsh Government to develop a new Collections Significance Toolkit for Welsh museums, which in short comprises guidance and a set of tools to help you better understand how significant and relevant your collections are. So it's been quite an involved process and there's a lot of ground to cover. So today, as Russell said, I'm just going to give you the highlights, an overview of how we've developed the toolkit, its structure and what it will help you to do. And then I'll leave time for some questions at the end. But as Russell said, I think you're heading into breakout rooms. So there probably won't be too much time for questions and we can maybe come back after the breakout rooms. So in 2013, Welsh Government published Why Do We Have It? A Significance Process and Template, which some of you may have used in previous significance assessment projects. And Welsh Government felt it was time for an update as the world has changed a great deal over the past decade. And they also wanted us to explore a new approach, something that would be particular to Wales, providing a suitable framework for the assessment of Welsh collections, and a process that would highlight the importance of involving associated communities, including underrepresented communities and those not currently engaged with the museum or organisation. So we were appointed in late summer 2022, and our team also included Dr. Kevin Mason, who's an expert in collections management and advises museums across the UK and Ireland on collections management issues. We got started straight away and began by studying existing toolkits from the UK, Australia, Finland and the Netherlands. And we wanted to produce a toolkit that would be suitable for a wide range of users, from those with little to no experience of significance assessment work to those who've conducted this type of work before, and also for a variety of different organisations, from volunteer-run and independent museums and heritage sites to those caring for local authority, university and national collections. So I understand that not all members of Sporting Heritage are working in a museum context, but the toolkit's been designed to be flexible and you should be able to use its processes to assess your collections. So consequently, we wanted to make the language clear, explain all terminology used for those less for those less familiar with collections management, and devise a logical process and overall make conducting a significance assessment less daunting. Something that would allow for careful planning to ensure museums are putting everything in place to conduct a successful assessment. And for example, making sure they have the necessary information, resources and workspaces to proceed, and supporting them to seek input from other sources to help inform decisions. So we consulted widely across the sector in Wales with colleagues working in a variety of different organisations, first through an online survey, which was open to all, and we also set up conversations online and in person. We then held focus groups with survey respondents who said they'd be interested in taking part, and tested out some of our early ideas for the toolkit, which informed further development. And then in early 2023, we conducted a series of pilot studies with organisations who'd been involved in the consultation and were keen to embark on significance assessment projects, and had several collections in mind that they thought would be good candidates for assessment. The final toolkit includes summaries of these pilot studies and case studies from other significance projects that we've been involved in or are aware of. And in January, we also ran 2 training sessions to introduce the toolkit, one for those with no previous experience and another for those with some experience of significance work. And all of these elements of consultation informed our thinking and helped us to formulate the structure of the toolkit and refine the guidance being offered. So we discovered that 25% of respondents had been involved in a significance assessment project before, and more than half of these projects had been conducted by specialist collection staff. Most people had done an assessment because they needed to rationalise their collection and understand which pieces fitted better with their organisation's purpose. Those who hadn't done an assessment before had been put off by a lack of resources, staff, time and budget, and their collections documentation and information not being in a good enough state to inform an assessment. Respondents had found existing toolkits complicated, slow going and daunting. And they also felt that they needed to adapt the toolkits to meet their needs, or to use a combination of several to achieve what they had set out to do. And several people also said that they were frustrated that Wales didn't have a framework that was designed for Welsh collections or allowed them to assess and articulate the national or international significance of Welsh collections. So you may wonder why you need to do significance work as you're already really busy and in some cases quite stretched, but it's something that should be part of our everyday collections management work, which can positively feed into various aspects of the museum's operations and output, or or the organisation, whichever type of organisation you happen to work for. And a better understanding of the significance of your collections means you can argue the case for investment in your organisation and collections, use significant statements to support funding bids, update your policies and procedures, and even inform your formal learning activities and events programmes, to name just a few things. So this new toolkit has been designed to work for a wide range of museums, from those with little to no experience of significance work to those who've embarked on significance work before, using existing guidance. And it's being designed so that it can be an ongoing process. It's not a one-off thing. It's something that you're involved in all the time and you move from project to project. It's a cyclical process. So what we learned from the consultation and from our study of existing toolkits, and then also our own experience of using some of the toolkits in our past projects, led us to develop a structure that divides the work into 4 stages. And I'll go into more detail about this in a moment. But stage 1 is getting started. That's planning. This is the planning stage that will help you to understand the context of your project and set your assessment goals. Stage 2 is collections review. This stage helps you to get your collections in order, so you're laying the groundwork for a successful assessment. Stage 3 is the significance assessment itself, and this is where you get down to the nitty-gritty of the significance work, and you can delve deeper into what you know about your chosen assessment collection. And then stage 4 is review and reassess, looking back at what you've done, how you can improve next time, and whether you met your assessment goals and what the next project might be. So stage 3 is where you conduct the significance assessment, and we've designed 4 action plans that can be used to help you achieve different assessment goals. And again, I'll run through these in a bit more detail in a mo. So the defining status action plan, that'll help you to understand how relevant your collections are to your organisation's purpose, vision and mission, what significance they hold locally or for associated communities, and whether they hold any potential for telling the story of Wales and its people, or possibly international stories. The rationalisation action plan will help you to determine which collections may not be as relevant to your mission and communities, and which may be candidates for disposal. The acquisition significance action plan can be used as a tool to assist with deciding whether to accept objects into your collection. And the exhibition significance action plan will help you decide which objects should be chosen for display, which hold greater significance for the stories you want to tell through interpretation and object selection. So each stage of the toolkit feeds into the next, so it's really important that each stage is worked through and completed. The toolkit also encourages you to be realistic about what you can achieve with the resources available. So the staff time, budget, workspaces you have available, the state of your documentation. And significance assessments can seem like an onerous task, especially if you have a large collection to tackle, or if it's something you've not embarked upon before, but we're proposing that you tackle manageable chunks of your collection at a time. You don't have to tackle the whole collection all at once. Start small to get the hang of the process and build your confidence in using the toolkit, and go from there. So looking at the stages, getting started, this is where you explore why you want to conduct a significance assessment, what your significance assessment goals might be, what you're hoping to achieve. Do these goals fit with the vision, mission and purpose of your organisation? That's a recurring theme. How much do you already know about your collections, and do your collections relate to particular communities? If so, do you already engage with them? If not, how could you connect with them? And it also asks you to think about what you need to consider before starting, such as the state of your documentation, condition and access to storage, available staff, the resources needed, available workspaces, whether your workspaces and stores are safe. So we've developed a series of tools to help you work through this process and decide which collection to assess. I'll not run through those today because we haven't time, but you can find them in the toolkit, and we've given really clear instructions of how to use them with visual aids. So by the end of the first stage, you should be able to answer these questions: why you need to understand the significance of the collection, which resources you'll need to do the project, and which is the strongest collection to assess. So collections review, This stage will help you to get your collections ready for assessment, making sure your collections data will help and not hinder the assessment. A collections review tool will help you to work through your collection or group of objects and check each object against review criteria. So you may be already familiar with collections review because it's a spectrum standard if you're working in a museum context, but if you're not working in a museum context, we give lots of guidance on how to conduct a collections review. And we're suggesting that you use a sample of random objects so that you can test your processes. So the tool we've provided is a scoring system, which will help you to spot any issues with your documentation, storage or resource implications. If any issues arise, what are the causes and can they be rectified? You can then resolve any issues before progressing and make sure you understand what can be achieved before you go forward. So by the end of stage 2, you'll understand the status of your collections data and collections management systems. You'll have identified and addressed any data gaps and other issues, and you'll be able to move on to the assessment stage. And we also suggest not skipping this stage because it will cause you more problems later on and drain your resources if you have to go back and fix your collections management before you can do your assessment. So the significance assessment itself, these are the action plans again. We've designed them so that they can be tailored to meet your particular needs, the needs of the organisation, the collections and the people who are working on the project, or you can use them at face value if you choose to. And then each action plan is also accompanied by a prompt sheet, which provides a framework to structure your discussion. And the idea is that you discuss the significance of each object against certain assessment criteria rather than using a scoring system. So if you're familiar with existing significance resources, you may be more used to a scored matrix system, but these action plans have been designed to support a more qualitative and philosophical approach to assessing the significance of your collections. So I'll run through these really quickly because I'm conscious that we haven't got much time. So defining status action plan, we've talked a little bit about that already, but it'll help you to identify star collections and objects and work out which connect to particular communities, which tell important stories about Wales, and which may even be able to help you tell international stories. By the end of this process, you should be able to write a statement of significance, which I mentioned earlier, you can use for a range of different uses to support work within your organisation. So basically to argue the case for the significance of what you hold. You might, hopefully you'd never come to this, but you might have to argue the case for the retention of your collections, and you'll have significant statements to prove why they are important. You can use them for funding bids and with other investors to show why they should invest in your collections and your projects. And you might want to use them in things like your collections development policy. So it's also important at this stage to point out that the toolkit does not place any greater importance on national or international significance over local or community significance. Objects with local community significance hold just as much importance and relevance, especially if they help you to engage and connect new people with your collections. So rationalisation. This is a plan that will help you to identify objects that don't hold particular relevance or significance for your organisation's purpose, and whether they don't contribute to the telling of local, Welsh or international stories. So you may already have an existing disposal list, or you may need to draw one up from scratch. You may have an idea of what potentially doesn't match your organisation's purpose or have relevance to your local area or community, or in your case, a particular sport or sports club perhaps. And this will help you to determine whether they fit. But also rationalisation isn't just about disposal, and it may be that you just simply need to better understand your collection so you can reorganise your stores to make better use of the space and transfer maybe less significant items to a learning or handling collection perhaps. So we also point people to other guidance to make sure you're following proper spectrum and Museums Association procedures when you're conducting a disposal process. So the Acquisition Significance Action Plan, this is where you may not have used significance assessment before to inform whether an object should be accepted into the collection. So again, does it fit with your purpose, vision and mission? And does the offer of donation or potential purchase meet your current collections development priorities? So it's been designed to be incorporated into your usual entry-level procedures, and it's a useful tool to help with the decision-making process. So it'll help you to avoid future resource and collections information issues by preventing that at source, as you'll have made well-informed decisions. So basically a way of helping you to logically work through a process so that you're not taking collections in objects into the collection that aren't relevant and that are going to cause you headaches later on, like taking up lots of storage space or needing conservation and that type of thing. So the intention is that we won't be causing resource problems for ourselves and our successors in the future. And so using this process will also contribute towards you producing comprehensive entry paperwork and history files. And that in turn feeds into collections management records and future significance work, and also provides a good grounding when you come to interpret the objects as well, because you've got lots of lovely information that will help you to write great exhibition text. So the Exhibition Significance Action Plan is something we added later on. And this will help you to identify collections or objects that add value to an exhibition or display, whether temporary or semi-permanent. So again, does the object match closely to the purpose of the proposed exhibition or display, and does it add value to the subject? Is the object supported by sufficient associated information to enable intellectual access by your chosen audience? So basically, does it have enough info that you can write really great exhibition text and people can engage with the objects? And are you including the object in the display because it has significance to the purpose of the exhibition, or because it has general significance to the museum? So it'll help you to identify collections or objects that strongly support the purpose of your exhibition by providing a direct and accessible link to the subject, and also help you to create a hierarchy of objects that can help when designing an exhibition that makes this subject as accessible to as many people as possible. So I'm sorry I'm rattling through these. As I said, there's a lot of ground to cover, and I could go on all day, but we're nearly there. So as I mentioned at the start, community is at the heart of the new toolkit, and it was something Welsh Government really wanted us to focus on. So each action plan at assessment stage encourages museums to involve associated communities in the conversation. So in the toolkit, we define community as people and places associated with the purpose and mission of the organisation. And these may be underrepresented groups or people you haven't engaged with before. They may be sports enthusiasts, fans of a particular club, players, those involved in the running of a club, a whole range of people with valuable knowledge and lived experience that could contribute to discussions about the significance of objects connected to their lives, culture, faith, experience. And we also advise people to seek input from external specialists and point them to resources where they can find that subject specialist knowledge, like subject specialist networks and groups such as your own. And we think we know, so we often think we know what is significant in our collections, and unconscious bias can creep in. So it's important that we seek external verification as well through peer review. That might be from colleagues working with similar collections, researchers, academics, or other appropriate sources, which will help to confirm our conclusions about what's significant in our collections. So final slide. The final stage is review and reassessment. So this is an opportunity to review the process and plan for your next project so you can build on the good work you've already done. You can review the project with colleagues who've worked on the assessment, discuss what did and didn't work well. And this doesn't have to, again, it doesn't have to be a big onerous task. It could just take the form of an evaluation meeting, much like you would set up to discuss an exhibition after it's closed or the end of another project, and just discuss what worked well and what you could improve upon next time. So that can often be tricky, but it's best to be honest with yourselves so that you're not being over ambitious next time and setting yourself up for a fall, and be honest about whether you met all of your assessment goals and what you might need to adjust next time to make things work better. So I've definitely talked for long enough. And I'll just leave you with this diagram, which is a sort of workflow chart that we've put together that shows you all of the stages and how they work together. I'm not sure if we've got time for questions, but perhaps we can chat after the breakout rooms.
Diolch, Jennifer. And there's an awful lot there. I mean, just to be very clear, this isn't the sort of sum total of opportunities to get to grips with the model, both in a practical sense or to understand, what it's about and what it's, the purpose of it. If there's any maybe sort of burning questions or observations, we'll take those now. Otherwise, we'll go straight into the breakout. Jennifer's with us for a bit longer this morning as well.
One thing I forgot to say, sorry, which you may have a question about, is that the toolkit is just in the process of being translated and being put online, and it'll be available on the Welsh Government and Collections Trust websites. We're hoping by the end of this month. We're saying spring 2023, in case there are any technical issues, but it is going to be launched imminently, so you'll be able to get hold of it soon. Okay.
The weather this week is very unspring-like, so to be fair.
Yeah.
Okay. Fran, I'm in your hands with respect to the technology. Assuming that we're all back, Justine, would you like to provide a bit of an overview as to what your group was discussing in relation to significance?
Yes, I can do. So we started off, with the conversation about how would the significance model work for the collections. And we were talking about that the Football Museum shared that they had already done a significant assessment but a couple of years ago, and they're probably ready to redo it, and that this model could be a really good way of doing that. We spoke about the fact that funding is a definite reason for thinking about being able to demonstrate why collections were significant. And we had a sports club, Cardiff Rugby Club, within our group. So totally different kind of organisation, also thinking that this could be a good model to use. And being able to use it again to sort of demonstrate why the collection is important, not just to Cardiff, but to Wales and then internationally. And the assessments around like individual artifacts could definitely help and be important and help rationalise collections. Then we spoke about potentials around commercial opportunities, funding opportunities, contemporary collection, support for collections to be clearer and support collections management structures, demonstrating the value of sporting collections specifically outside of formal heritage, that they are just as valuable as formal heritage, and then also helping to raise that profile of sporting collections being really important and significant, because there's still often that kind of sort of snobbery around sporting collections, and trying to really demonstrate that should definitely not be there. And then we spoke about diversity, and that there is still definite huge issues, particularly in terms of women's collections or women within the sport, and people of colour, various different diversity needs that aren't shown within heritage or the sport, but that heritage has got a real potential to start shifting that, but there's a long way to go. And opportunities for using things like dates and anniversaries through the media to share that. And then we kind of ran out of time, but we quickly managed to talk about what things people might need. So don't know yet because we haven't seen it. Communication, making sure they know about it and how to use it. Longer discussions maybe about the toolkit and how to use it and apply it. Potentials for it to be related specifically to sport, and concise information shared so that it's really easy to use. So I think that was it. Don't know if anyone wants to.
Thanks, Justine. Jamie?
Okay, thank you very much. So we rattled through things. So basically on the question, so the first one in terms of how can the significance model work for our collections, there was acknowledgement if you don't actually hold collections, it might not directly affect us, but we can understand that it can be very good for other groups, especially to draw attention to collections of significance. In our groups, it was acknowledged that if there are large collections, then the significance model could help in terms of looking at specific sporting or thematic collections, for example, diversity, to try and tell a diverse story in a way that the story has previously been hidden or has previously been untold, and that story could be told there. We did talk there about hidden collections of interest. The example that was used there was newspapers particularly, or even sporting programs. I think every person who's ever played football knows somebody's dad who collects sporting programs from the year dot through from some obscure team, and so that's particularly important there. And it's about how we can try and archive them. In terms of the opportunities that could present, it was acknowledged that the significance model can really help in terms of identifying gaps such as time periods, gender, or contemporary issues, and then who to work with in terms of building up that collection. It can also be an opportunity to collect stories or memories of hidden histories, such as women in particular sports. In terms of the hidden heritage information that Russ talked about, how could the diversity inclusion agenda affect our collections? We were starting to run out of things here, so we were rattling through, or I was trying to rattle through things. It was talked about how things like social media can be particularly of interest, and Alan talked a great deal about this, how a lot of sports clubs, it can may have Twitter feeds, but that can be quite selective, and it's in terms of that then impacted onto the final question, which was about the needs. We talked only briefly, I apologize there, but for example, if you're trying to collate a social media feed, and we talked about Twitter specifically, that archive can only be collated if it's based in the UK, and sometimes Twitter feeds can be quite long, so it's a need to be quite selective with what information we are collating. And it was talked about how the opportunity can be or what support can be needed. If it's a physical collection, then it's about asking for information in terms of sharing information for community contribution, for community collections, and asking for contributions for not only building up the collection but also information when it comes to building up and sharing information about certain objects. Feel free, my group, to jump in if I've misrepresented, or if there's other things that you think should be mentioned there.
And the chat panel is there to drop any other observations in as well. Fran, your group, anything kind of maybe in addition to any of that?
Yes, with relating to the significance, we actually talked about it slightly in a more process-driven way, looking at where we might fit it into sort of existing processes, because quite often, obviously Jennifer was recommending that we build it in as part of our business as usual. It should be, possibly at that same point when you're taking items into your collection, although if you've got a historic collection, it becomes a reviewing activity. So it's how you balance those two activities, that you have it at the beginning, but you also need to go back and review your historic collections. And how, if you're a curator who's been working with your collection for quite a long time, you tend to use your sort of professional experience to know whether something is going to be a significant acquisition to your collection. So how you then spend the time to accommodate the more sort of formal significance framework into your process. Ellen, who was part of my group, has a venue, but they loan collections in, capture them, digitize them, and return them. So we were talking about how the significance process might work for them when they will have the digital legacy, but they don't actually hold a physical collection. So we were talking about how they could, or how she was saying they could speak about significance to the organisations that they're actually loaning their material from as well. So it's communicating that idea of significance back out to the wider community. When we talked about sort of opportunities and stumbling blocks, it's the ones that you would always expect. It's capacity. So it's having one thing to build it into your sort of acquisition process as you're going along, but actually if you need to do that review of your historic collection, I think Oliver was saying that there isn't time within his business as usual to do that, but it's not necessarily something that you can unless you've got a very well, I don't mean to malign volunteers, but to have volunteers to come in and do, because they will need quite a lot of collection knowledge behind it. So it's having the time to be able to train up volunteers to a sufficient level, or having somebody to come in and supervise volunteers so that they're there to do it. So it's looking at those sort of capacity issues. And I think Ellen had the same sort of capacity issues around that. Also, Ellen talked about maybe having somebody who could come in, you know, if you're both familiar with the framework, actually coming in and then going, actually, this is how it could apply to your organisation. So almost having that bespoke startup, so tailoring it for your organisation so that you can really get it, your head around it, so that then you can go off and deliver it. Around sort of ongoing support, obviously stuff around capacity, we were lucky enough to have Lloyd in our group, who's from Heritage Fund, and there's potential that implementing a significance project, as long as you meet the engaging a wider range of people within your project, would be a suitable topic for Heritage Fund funding. So yeah, it's having that capacity to be able to review, and possibly having the simple templates, and this is where we need to wait for the toolkit to come out, having simple jargon-free templates that we can apply to our collections. I jumped out when and left my group to talk about hidden histories and inclusion. So if there's anybody from my group who wants to jump in and just say what you talked about in the last sort of, I know it was only the last sort of 60 seconds.
I just briefly said from Newport Museum's perspective that we've got kind of underrepresented groups kind of written into our kind of collections policy, but frequently you need to kind of be proactive with targeting those groups and projects rather than being reactive. And unfortunately, lots of those groups are underrepresented in our collections because we haven't kind of proactively kind of targeted them. And that's my perspective from Newport Museum.
Thank you, Oliver. I think that's, unless anybody else wants to jump in, that was probably all from my group.
Thanks, Fran. On that issue of bespoke, I think one of the things that came through in our group, we were lucky in the sense that we had Jennifer in ours. She might not have seen it as being lucky, but a sense that there's scope within this framework, this toolkit, for it to not be one size fits all, and there's actually people can come at it. Yes, there's a process, but that you know, how maybe an archive, and we had Laura talking from the perspective of an archive service, might come at it a little bit differently than to you know, a smaller independent museum that's got fewer collections as well. And Jane gave us some kind of perspective from her museum in Sylvain. There certainly seems to be a timeliness to this, in the sense that Jane was talking about having a review to do, recognizing it needs to be done, and that actually is probably a I don't know, maybe a sober, that's not a word that Jane used, but that's kind of my interpretation, is that so a process of that issue of then disposal. I mean, which items are we keeping in, are we not using, and so on, and that this helps with that process. I think I'd probably just echo everything that's been said about capacity. I don't think we've said anything different to any of that. And we had, and again, it was kind of cut short at the very end. I think we might have had we had a bit more time, an interesting conversation about this, the definition, if you like, of the term community. So the community engagement is in this. It's an element of the process and of the toolkit, and a prominent one. But actually, unpicking that term community means different things in different areas, and there's nuance and intersectionality and all those sorts of things between communities of place, communities of interest, and so on. So I feel that would have been, I think that would have been a really good conversation if we had a little bit longer. Anything else from my group, though? Otherwise, we will push on. Okay, Jennifer did drop something in the chat, but you'd have to take my word for it if you can't see it. Basically, she wants to continue the engagement and continue the dialogue and the discussion. And we've said that, you know, I've offered, and hopefully not speaking out of turn, Justine and Fran, you know, we're happy to facilitate that between her and the sport and heritage sector. And she was very grateful for the opportunity to speak with you. During her slides, there was, I don't know if I'd have tuned into this, my antenna were buzzing, a programme from England versus Wales 1977 at Wembley, the only time Wales men's team ever won at Wembley. And I'm one of those nerds that Jamie was referring to about collecting the programmes. It really irks me these days that you don't really get many physical programmes at matches anymore. And I think that's a nice segue, albeit a whingy one on my part, into the next bit, which is looking at digital, both the digitizing of things that are in a physical, tactile kind of format, but also those things that, of course, have perhaps only ever been digital, given the age in which we live. Yeah, that's fair enough. Guilty as charged. So Fran, introduce you a little bit at the start. Might be helpful to just give another introduction as well. Laura has joined us as well. Laura Cotton from Glamorgan Archive. After Fran has spoken, we'll go straight into Laura's talk on by the sounds of it, an exciting digital project that is on the horizon in Wales. And then we'll break into some other breakout rooms and I'll explain a little bit more about that process in due course. So Fran, over to you.
Lovely, thanks, Russ. I'll just share my screen. Hope it's all there. There we are. Can everybody see that? So, yes, my name's Fran Stovold. I run the workforce development programme for Sporting Heritage. So I run our webinar programme. we're going to have a series of in-person events this year, starting off with one on the 23rd in Newport as part of this programme of activity in Wales. I also facilitate a number of peer-to-peer networks, some of which may be of interest to those in the room today. Particularly if you're from a sports club or a national governing body, you may want to join our Heritage Champions group. If you're from a football club or a football collection, you may want to come and join our football group. I know that Nick is already part of that. And actually, you've probably got a foot in both camps. I also have, my final one is if you're representing a national collection, we have a national collections network as well. All the details are on the Sporting Heritage website, and I will ping a link in the chat. And I think we'll send around a range of follow-up resources after this, and I will put all those links in. So if you're interested in joining, we meet quarterly just to discuss things that are pertinent to ourselves. So that's me as a whole. Oh, I also organised the conference, a small thing, which is not happening this year, but it will be for 2024. So moving on from introductions, talking about developing digital collections. So as you know, we're talking about the second and third aims within the Welsh strategy today. The survey data that Russell has already covered has captured a lot of information about collections in Wales. If I just move on to my next slide, here we go, there we are. So we've captured a lot about the physical collections that are present in Wales. There's still obviously work to be done. This is very much an ongoing process. When you look on the Sporting Heritage website, I think there are 12 collections listed on our collections database, and we know that's only just the tip of the iceberg. We know that where some of the physical collections are, and we know that some people are working digitally as well. So when you look at the aims in the framework, when we're talking about this distributed collection of Welsh sporting heritage, it's one thing to have the physical collections and work out how to share and loan and collaborate, but by working digitally, that is going to really accelerate that process and that ability to build partnerships, which is one of those key things that's coming out of the survey that people are interested in doing. The other element that obviously is coming up out of the framework is how that as Sporting Heritage and working alongside the Welsh Government, how we can provide the support and training or networking or comms to actually bring all of this together. So particularly with my workforce development hat on, I'm really keen to know what we can be providing to support you. And I know there's a range of experience in the room and a range of collections and a range of organisations. As with Sporting Heritage, we are one of the broadest churches, so I know there is no one size fits all. So I'm really interested, even if you think that you are the only type of collection that you have, I'm still really interested to hear from you. So don't feel that you could ever say something that isn't relevant or that other people are thinking. So when we're talking about creating and caring for digital collections, I think Russell's touched on this already. We're really talking about two different elements very broadly. We're talking about digitising existing material. So all the boxes and boxes of material you might have sat in your store, all the things that you might loan in from your community. But we're also looking at how to collect born digital material. So material that's never existed in a physical format. And we're already having conversations with other sporting organisations across the UK about how they can they almost feel like they need to catch up with this, because unless you're already doing it, one of the national governing bodies of sport that we're talking to is looking at the gaps they've got from the mid to late 90s and definitely from the year 2000 onwards, where they haven't had mechanisms in place to collect some of that born digital material. So we're looking already at catching up on some of that. And I don't know if some of you already feel like you might be in a similar situation. So I'm just going to run through some of the pros and cons of those two elements, the digitising existing material and the born digital. Yes, my name's Fran Stovold. I run the workforce development programme for Sporting Heritage. So I run our webinar programme. we're going to have a series of in-person events this year, starting off with one on the 23rd in Newport as part of this programme of activity in Wales. I also facilitate a number of peer-to-peer networks, some of which may be of interest to those in the room today. Particularly if you're from a sports club or a national governing body, you may want to join our Heritage Champions group. If you're from a football club or a football collection, you may want to come and join our football group. I know that Nick is already part of that. And actually, you've probably got a foot in both camps. I also have, my final one is if you're representing a national collection, we have a national collections network as well. All the details are on the Sporting Heritage website, and I will ping a link in the chat. And I think we'll send around a range of follow-up resources after this, and I will put all those links in. So if you're interested in joining, we meet quarterly just to discuss things that are pertinent to ourselves. So that's me as a whole. Oh, I also organised the conference, a small thing, which is not happening this year, but it will be for 2024. So moving on from introductions, talking about developing digital collections. So as you know, we're talking about the second and third aims within the Welsh strategy today. The survey data that Russell has already covered has captured a lot of information about collections in Wales. If I just move on to my next slide, here we go, there we are. So we've captured a lot about the physical collections that are present in Wales. There's still obviously work to be done. This is very much an ongoing process. When you look on the Sporting Heritage website, I think there are 12 collections listed on our collections database, and we know that's only just the tip of the iceberg. We know that where some of the physical collections are, and we know that some people are working digitally as well. So when you look at the aims in the framework, when we're talking about this distributed collection of Welsh sporting heritage, it's one thing to have the physical collections and work out how to share and loan and collaborate, but by working digitally, that is going to really accelerate that process and that ability to build partnerships, which is one of those key things that's coming out of the survey that people are interested in doing. The other element that obviously is coming up out of the framework is how that as Sporting Heritage and working alongside the Welsh Government, how we can provide the support and training or networking or comms to actually bring all of this together. So particularly with my workforce development hat on, I'm really keen to know what we can be providing to support you. And I know there's a range of experience in the room and a range of collections and a range of organisations. As with Sporting Heritage, we are one of the broadest churches, so I know there is no one size fits all. So I'm really interested, even if you think that you are the only type of collection that you have, I'm still really interested to hear from you. So don't feel that you could ever say something that isn't relevant or that other people are thinking. So when we're talking about creating and caring for digital collections, I think Russell's touched on this already. We're really talking about two different elements very broadly. We're talking about digitising existing material. So all the boxes and boxes of material you might have sat in your store, all the things that you might loan in from your community. But we're also looking at how to collect born digital material. So material that's never existed in a physical format. And we're already having conversations with other sporting organisations across the UK about how they can they almost feel like they need to catch up with this, because unless you're already doing it, one of the national governing bodies of sport that we're talking to is looking at the gaps they've got from the mid to late 90s and definitely from the year 2000 onwards, where they haven't had mechanisms in place to collect some of that born digital material. So we're looking already at catching up on some of that. And I don't know if some of you already feel like you might be in a similar situation. So I'm just going to run through some of the pros and cons of those two elements, the digitising existing material and the born digital, and share some links with everybody. But I really would like this to be the beginning of a chat with everybody who's in the room, and then I will hand on to Laura, who's going to talk about how it's actually physically working for Glamorgan Archives. So talking about digitising existing material, from a collections point of view, which I'm a curator at heart, it's fantastic because it reduces your need to handle the original material. You can do so much collection related activity without actually having to get the original item out of the box, which obviously is mitigating any further deterioration. So also by digitizing it, it allows you to monitor any deterioration. If you've ever had to do condition checking, going through thousands and thousands of objects in your store, having a digital record of your collection enables you to do that so much more effectively. However, to be able to do it, and I can't emphasize this enough, it involves a huge amount of time to plan it and make sure that you have everything in place. The number of digital projects that we see that come through and 6 months down the line or a year into the line down the line, they think, oh, if only we'd thought about that at the beginning. So it's worth talking to other people who've done projects like that. And that's why it's so valuable to have Laura talking to us today. And there'll be other projects both within Wales and across the wider Sporting Heritage Network. So if you would like to speak to somebody who's already working on a project, please come and speak to us, because we're more than happy to sort of broker partnerships or facilitate those sort of networking. As part of your planning, you need to set up your specifications. There are lots of specifications out there. So by no means do you need to reinvent the wheel. And it's definitely worth looking at some of the larger organisations who have set their digital specs, so that if you ever wanted to align yourself with a larger collection, you know that you've hit those higher standards. Again, I've worked with a project quite recently outside of the sporting sector where they digitised thousands and thousands of images, but have done them at quite a low res, and you just know that within 5 to 10 years those file formats are not going to be, well, they're not of archive quality now, so they definitely won't be in the future. By digitising your existing material, you are essentially creating a second collection, and that's quite a big thing to get your head around. So it will then require its own care. So you're creating almost a digital, digital surrogate of your existing material. And for that, you need to allow for the space on a server or wherever you want to in the cloud, and budget to store that, because once you've got this digital material, there is an ongoing cost. And sometimes that incrementally can be more than it's costing you to actually store the physical originals. So this goes back to having that time to invest in your planning. As with all collection care and collection management activity, it requires a consistent approach. But the dividend that it brings is it will make your collections far more shareable. And as I say, that underpins some of the work that we're looking at in the strategy. So looking at born digital material, as I say, the number of people that we've been speaking to recently who've actually now making a conscious decision to collect born digital material, as Russell was saying, the number of programmes that are only available in the digital format now and not in a hard copy format. So the chances of people coming in and handing stuff over the front desk in the way that they used to is going to get sort of ever diminishing for particular types of collection material. However, I think across, this is a wide sweeping generalisation, but sometimes digital material can be perceived as of less historic value. You can't hold it, you can't smell it, it doesn't give you all those sensory things of, that wow of the real thing that you get with collection items. Digital, people think it's, disposable, you can delete it, it doesn't carry that same weight. So it's being able to shift that mindset, both within ourselves as organisations, but particularly within those communities who might share or donate items into our collections. So as I say, yes, digital items can be perceived as more disposable and more editable. So it's there's a whole discussion around, whether you see things in their original format, particularly if you're collecting photography, whether you allow a photographer to change and run their images through Photoshop, whether you collect them as the raw files, whether you collect them as TIFFs. There's a whole discussion, and you need to work out what is right for you as an organisation. And also, not all donations will come, digital donations will come in an ideal format. It would be lovely if everybody adhered to the fantastic digital specifications that we would set for ourselves. So it's how you deal with things that might come in as low res files, as file formats that are quite difficult to archive. So it's having those discussions and how you deal with those, and being clear on who owns the rights. Quite often digital material gets passed from person to person, and it's quite difficult to track down the provenance, and making sure you've got all your copyright and all the GDPR and the intellectual property pinned down. So just like digitising your historic collections, this needs a separate amount of time for planning and thinking through the whole process. Again, consistent approach, and again, need for space and budget for storage, but it will pay dividends in the end. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour through those two sections. Sporting Heritage as an organisation, we are here to support that work alongside other sector support agencies and organisations, that some of which we've heard from today. Within our toolkit, which is available on our website, there is a whole section around digitisation. There's also a section around contemporary collecting, which covers some of the collecting born digital material. There's also a section around collections at risk, which I know came up as a small element within the survey, but if you are interested in working out or ever having to assess whether your collection is at risk, there is that section to explore. Looking at digital preservation, one of the key places to go and have a look is the Digital Preservation Coalition. They have a fantastic digital preservation handbook. So this is your guidelines on, once you have your digital archive or digital collection, and then how you actually preserve that. So it's either it's your second collection if you've digitized your historic collection, or it's how you then manage your born digital collection. They're also hosting now the National Archives Novice to Know-How online course around digital preservation as well, which helps you establish processes. So that's far more process driven. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour through. I will circulate this presentation with all the links in, and I will share my email address. So please do get in touch with me if you would like to. And I would like to hand the baton over to Laura.
Thanks, Fran. That's really good, because it saves me having to kind of mention a few of the things that I might have had to mention, because you've done all of the legwork to start with, which is great. Thank you. So I'm just going to kind of follow up from what Fran was saying. I'm not going to share a presentation because I work for a local authority, and local authority IT notoriously does not like Zoom. So if I started trying to share a presentation, I think Zoom would probably fall over for me, and I would fall off the call. So I'm keeping it simple. I'm going to talk very briefly about the Welsh context, mainly around digital preservation. So I'm not really going to be talking about the kind of digitised collections and what you might want to do with that. But, you know, I can talk to you about what we do with digitisation as well. But mostly today, I'm going to be focusing on digital preservation. Largely because we've been doing some work. So we, meaning Welsh Local Authority Archive Services. So my day job is as Glamorgan Archivist at Glamorgan Archives, but I also am involved with the Archives and Records Council Wales, and I'm currently chair of Archives and Records Council Wales. So a lot of the work that we've been doing recently across Welsh Local Authority Archive Services in particular has been looking at digital preservation and thinking about what we do. We've had a lot of support from Welsh Government and the National Library of Wales to look at a kind of collaborative digital preservation solution. So to do digital preservation in a kind of a robust, strong way, especially as an archive service needs to be, that might be seeking accreditation or have accreditation, you really need to kind of think about having a digital preservation repository in place. And the way I like to think about a digital preservation repository is like an extra strong room. So we in archive services have lots of strong rooms. I've got 4 archive strong rooms in which we keep all of our paper, photographs, parchment, all of that kind of stuff. Well, I like to think that soon we are going to have an extra strong room, which is where we're going to keep everything that's digital. A digital preservation solution can help us to manage the material. So if you happen to do the novice to know-how training that Fran was talking about, you'll see that a big part of the kind of process of digital preservation is around ingesting it into a system, the system looking after it and rendering it out in a format that is readable. So it's about some of those old file formats that we might have had years ago. I always mention WordPerfect as a perfect example, because those of us that have been around a long time will remember WordPerfect. Well, now you can't read those files in Microsoft because Microsoft makes that kind of thing obsolete. So you'd be able to put your WordPerfect files into a solution, and at the end of it, get something out in a nice format that enables you to read it, probably a PDF. So we're very much looking together across the local authority archive services in Wales, of which there are 12 of us, looking at a collaborative digital preservation solution. In 2020-2021, we undertook a kind of a scoping exercise to look at what kinds of material are around in the local authorities, what we might want to preserve. And we also then did a pilot of a solution to look at a particular piece of software that we could use to help us with the practicalities of making digital preservation work. So we're currently working on a business case for the funding to try and procure a digital preservation repository system. And we're hoping to have that in place sometime in the next year or so. A couple of us might be a bit quicker than that, but that's the plan. And we're working very closely with Welsh Government to be able to enable us to do that. So this is something they're very keen for us to do as well. So why am I talking about this here? As I say, soon, all local authority archives should have a digital preservation repository in place to be able to take born digital records. So whilst the business case that we're working on focuses on the local authorities and the need to preserve the local authority records, because they're the people who pay our wages and pay for our buildings, archives also hold a real range of digital material for other organisations and individuals. So whilst we hold a range of paper records and related, we also are starting to get in digital records from a number of different organisations and have been for some time. So all of those records would also be added to any kind of repository solution that we would have in place. So I'm suggesting that for anybody here who is involved in a sporting organisation or a sporting body, you might want to consider discussing any of your requirements around digital records with your local archive service. You don't need to keep everything digital in much the same way as you don't need to keep everything that's physical, but it's important to make sure that the born digital material that you do need to keep and that you do want to keep is protected, and that you've got a plan in place of where it's going to go. You don't have to do it all yourself is a really important point to make. There are people out there who can help you with this. If you are already working with an archive service, be it a local authority or be it a university or wherever, to store physical records, photographic material, whatever you might like to include within your collection, consider talking to them about the digital as well, because it's something that they will be looking at and they will be thinking about. I think it's really important to discuss any deposit you might want to make with the local service in advance, so they can advise you on what they will take, what they won't take, what would be something that would be thought about to be kept long term. And when we're talking about digital preservation, we're really talking about stuff that you would want to keep long term. So, if you're talking about financial records that you only need to keep for 7 years, then that's not the type of thing you would want to put into a digital preservation system. It's a very expensive way of doing something where you don't need to. We're talking about stuff that you'd want to keep long term. Some of that historic material potentially, but it doesn't have to be old. And I feel this is something I always have to emphasize when I'm talking about archives, is archives are not old necessarily. So, we have material that we will take in that is very, very modern. So, for example, not in a sporting context, but in a wider context, we have some emails that we took in relating to the COVID-19 pandemic from, a couple of years ago, that even though they're only a couple of years old, they're going to be equally of interest to people in 100 years time. So, we can keep those now. We've had them deposited with us now with a view to keeping them in the long term. So, each archive service, be it a local archive service or be it a university or whatever, will have an idea about what they will take and what they won't take, and you can discuss that with them. We are hoping that the universities will join us in our collaborative project as well, so we're going to be widening it out. It started as local authorities because that was the piece of funding that we had in place, was specifically for local authorities, so that's how it started, but we're widening it out now. And if your organisation feels that they might want their own system to keep things and you'd like to join in with the Welsh Consortium, get in touch. more than happy to discuss it with you and talk about what we want to do and the kind of costs per user that are involved in that. You know, I think the important thing to note is that, you know, a bit like we've already said, it's key that we talk about this and we, you know, speak to the right people and find out from other people what's going on, because you shouldn't feel like you're having to deal with it on your own and you're the only one having to kind of grapple with it, because everybody else is dealing with it at the same time. And, you know, we've been working in this area and thinking about this for a very long time, and hopefully we're getting close to having a solution in place. But you know, we've got some expertise that we're more than happy to share with you. So, you know, if this is something that you think would be of use and you think would be an interesting conversation to have, please do get in touch. I'll pop my email address in the chat. So if anybody does want to get in touch with me direct, you can do. And even if you think, oh, well, I'm not in the Glamorgan area, so she's not going to want to talk to me, I'm more than happy to put you in touch with the person in your area who's dealing with it, because I know all of them as well. So, you know, please do bear us in mind and think about what you want to do when you're thinking about what you want to do with your digital material. And if you're not sure whether it's worth keeping or not, talk to your archivist, because they'll be able to tell you whether it's worth keeping or not. And they'd far rather have the conversation than you get rid of something and then go, oh, sorry, we got rid of that. It's very important to kind of keep having those conversations. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Laura. And I can vouch that she will put you in touch with the right people, because she's done that with me recently, something completely non-sporting related. My ears pricked up as when you said you've been sent emails, because I got hundreds I could send you, trust me, but they're to be answered first, let alone archived. We're going to break up into a couple of rooms now, discuss some of this in a little bit more detail. This is a real kind of key, lots of it is important, don't get me wrong, but in terms of what we've been asked to do and tasked to do by Welsh Government, this kind of digital agenda then in the broadest sense is a headline within what Sporting Heritage have been asked to do. So this is an important area for us. So we are really keen to hear what people have to say about it, both in terms of opportunities, but then sort of, you know, hopes, fears as well, and some of the concerns around capacity, etc., that they may have. But about 15 minutes, we'll reconvene, and then we're very much on the home straight with a bit more information about some of the other upcoming activities this month, both in Wales and beyond. So hand over to Fran.
Right, so yes, I hope I've mixed everybody up, but apologies if you're chatting with the same people as before. As always, I will put I'll broadcast the questions out. I will open the rooms now, and yes, we'll have about sort of 15 minutes. I'll let you know when the rooms are going to close, and see everybody on the other side. Any problems, stay in the main room. Jamie.
Is that all of us back? Yeah, cool. So digital. Who went first last time? Let's go to Justine again. It was Justine. Go on.
Hello. Yeah, we got kicked out of our group. We carried on talking too long. So yeah, some really good discussions in there. That basically born digital seems to be a new term that people are used to and are starting to get more used to, but that it's quite difficult to describe sometimes, and obviously needs different kind of input and capacity and funding to digitization of objects, which is already quite tricky. Then we spoke about the fact that people are using both and are generating both. So for example, if they're asking for digital pictures to be submitted by the community, and the things we spoke about in terms of training and capacity needs, lots and lots of discussion around funding and associated costs, lots of discussions around collaborations, making sure that those links are in there, People's Collection Wales, for example, links across to libraries and the way that libraries work differently in terms of economies of scale, which doesn't happen in the museum sector, but the role for Sporting Heritage to be able to maybe support that going forward. Issues around making tech accessible in a longer term. Central repository, very, very important. Long-term funding and making sure that this isn't just kind of like short-term activity, but that it's really, because it's so expensive and cost for digital, are long-term and they're ongoing. What is the sustainability for that? Potential around using things like Wikimedia UK and sharing collections and using their platforms. reaching out to other local sporting organisations and partners, and yes, definitely to knowing more about the toolkit and how to use it, and with other organisations. And then, yeah, we didn't quite get to the last question.
Thank you, Justine. Jamie?
There was quite a bit there that's from Justine's group that we discussed as well, so I won't sort of go over those, although we didn't talk about funding, so clearly our group didn't want any money. So no, I'm sure we didn't get onto that. I used it as a bit of a, I don't know, I just found it fascinating. I've learned so much in that small breakout room. We talked about, just to sort of go on one specific example that sort of highlights things, we talked about sort of, you know, we looked at sort of sports programs and about the challenges there that they have, and that programs are often designed in a format that means that because the sector isn't necessarily keeping up with the technology, that in future points those programs are not going to be archivable because they're either published in places which themselves are not archivable, but also often they're not readable at the time. So we talked about maybe being able to work with clubs so that programs, for example, are being used, programs are being used, or platforms are being used, whether that's social media or virtual programs that are born digital, that they're being used in a format that they are easily able to be archivable. I probably feel free, my group, to make that a little bit more clear. I just used it as an education session on there, but have I got across the main direction of travel that we discussed?
Yeah, I'll if you want, I'll mention very quickly.
Yeah,
what it was basically, yeah, we talked about the challenges of programs, and I mean they've gone online, which can be frustrating for us, no doubt. Harder to collect, but what happens is that they tend to use a platform which are very difficult to archive. Like with, I went to the Scarlets the other day down West Wales. Their program is used on a Xeon platform. My job is very much web archiving. How I archive that, we don't know. You know what I mean? It's sort of, you know, because it's not on the web, it's further down in the web. So we lose it, and once we lose those programs, what's the danger we got now? Because they use those Xeon platforms, these programs will be lost forever, basically. And there was one thing when mentioned as well, we're communicating with, a lot with the football clubs, especially with the marketing. There's a lot of change of staff there all the time. So when we contact them, next time we contact them, somebody new works there. So that's another thing, but yeah. Hope that helped.
We went to the sort of like, we sort of went down the digital nuts and bolts of some of the challenges that we could face.
We can't possibly have crammed everything into this morning, but I guess maybe there's a tendency, and this came up in my group, so maybe I'll jump in and in here, and then come to you, Fran. So David, for example, talked about some of the oral history work that they've been doing, so the recording of past players, the key people at Cardiff Rugby Club. There's a variation, it's another type of digital format, and I do the podcasts for Sporting Heritage and for other organisations, so MP3s, WAV files, I'm comfortable in that speak. You're not talking about necessarily, maybe sometimes the impression can be given that we're talking about photographs of things, and we did discuss that, and Rick was very helpful with some advice from his background with relation to some of that, and maybe the monetizing of things as well, that more commercial mindset that maybe, I don't know, playing devil's advocate a little bit here, maybe sometimes the sector isn't all that necessarily comfortable in discussing, I don't know, but that was very, very helpful. I guess it's probably fair to say Cardiff Rugby Club are perhaps ahead of the curve in terms of a lot of other sports clubs in terms of putting things online. But I think what has come through loud and clear as well is that it's a huge amount of time and effort, and that needs to be sort of recognised, I think, by people who are again playing devil's advocate, pushing this agenda. It's on the shoulders of far too few people in too many cases. And on the point of collaboration. Within rugby in Wales anyway, South Wales, there has been some discussions around how can collaboration happen. What Cardiff has done might be not too different to what Swansea Rugby Club might want to do. Newport have got a terrific collection with the Gwent Archive, which we've already heard from, for example. So there's other people in the same situation. So is there potential to kind of to build capacity by collaborating a little bit more? And it's a big question mark, but there seems to be an appetite in principle anyway, if not necessarily in practice, because of things like time and limitations on capacity and the like. Fran, let's go to you, and then we'll be wrapping up.
I wasn't a facilitator this time, so
Of course.
because we were only 3 groups.
Of course.
But what I will jump in and say is there are examples out there of collaborative projects for digitisation. Obviously, they require funding, and the one that springs to mind is the Ogilvy Muster, which another subject specialist network have done, which is the Army Museums Ogilvy Trust. They did have a considerable amount of funding to do it, but there was economies of scale where they brought in the First World War archives of about 150 regimental and corps British Army museums. So that's well worth looking at, but it had millions of pounds worth of funding. But the principle of it has worked. I'm sure it could be done on a smaller scale, but yeah. So there are examples of that collaborative work out there.
And as an aside, they will be featured in the online exhibition. Almost certainly. It's almost too many things that they've suggested, actually. So it's just picking some of the best ones. And it's boxing, it's rowing, it's hockey, the First World War stuff as well as some absolutely fascinating stuff. I mean, while we've got Fran and Laura, any other kind of questions or observations to put back to them out of that conversation and their presentations before we wrap up? Okay. Is there anything, Justine, should we start kind of Sporting Heritage wide and then localise it a bit more?
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, thank you all. So yeah, Sporting Heritage currently in a resilience programme. So we're taking our time to pause, look at our work, look at the development of everything that we deliver, at the same time as continuing some of our core programming, which is around the work that you're seeing here, so the Welsh Strategic Framework, and some of our activity around National Sporting Heritage Day. You'll see things like our core programme on the Sporting Heritage Awards, the conference, and our core themed month moving to the beginning of next year, and you'll see those advertised through our newsletter very soon. So coming up, the main thing to think about is National Sporting Heritage Day in September, and then the work that Fran's been talking about as well around workforce development, our in-person events. You'll see the stakeholder analysis coming out where we're asking you all, what works for you, what doesn't work for you, what do you need from us, and how can we shift what we're doing to make it even more easily accessible and usable for you. So please, when you see that come out in our next newsletter, which should be towards the end of this month, please let us know as much thoughts as you can about how we can support, and central to that work is the delivery of the strategic framework, and making sure that all of those outputs that we got in place through the framework and the consultation, we're able to deliver in the next 2 years. So yeah, I think time-wise, that's enough for me.
The online exhibition, we are looking for, still open to suggestions for items for that. It's going to be hosted on the Sport and Heritage website. There's already examples of exhibitions on there. So there's one called, I think it's called On the Ball, around the history of football, women's football, in Sheffield, that was launched to coincide with the European Championships that England hosted last year. And we're looking to do something similar that just kind of casts a spotlight, if you like, on sport and heritage in Wales. And of course, it's not just for a Welsh audience, it's for people all around the world. We want to get a breadth of sports in there. And we've had a number of suggestions. So if you're interested and want to nominate something, then by all means. We haven't, David, had any oral material nominated, and it would be great to have not just a breadth of sport, but also of items as well, and not just pictures of things. But obviously we're happy to take those. So I just kind of throw that out there. Simplest thing to do, email me, get in touch, and I can send you the links and all of the other things for you as well. Question from somebody, from Jane, about the research panel. I'm pretty sure they can be. Jane, I'll take some guidance on how far and wide the research panel notes will be circulated from Justine. Thank you to Lloyd. I suspect if we were in person, Lloyd would be getting swamped by people on the way out now, because of his funding. Form an orderly queue, people, please. And I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I need to bring to your attention. I've got my notes here. Thank you, diolch yn fawr to Stefan for the translation a little bit earlier. Thank you to Jamie, Fran and Justine for facilitating. Thank you to all of you for your efforts. I think that is everything. I think that is all of the housekeeping and the notes of this parish. We overrun by 1 minute. Any concluding, closing comments, and I'll let you carry on with your day otherwise.
Sorry, I was trying to type in if we're all leaving 2 seconds. Just say, if you are aware or part of a group or a club that are perhaps facing sort of barriers on digitising and making access to material online possible, please feel free to get in touch. I'll put my email in the chat now. We can provide free training on digitising and oral history as well, and use of the People's Collection Wales website as a platform to celebrate their club, their history, their whatever it might be in the theme.
Diolch yn fawr, Berian. Stefan, I think you're the only person who can access the full director's cut version of the chat as well. So if you could download that before we leave, I'd be very grateful, because I know there's a lot of links in that we can probably share and would be of use to people. Any other housekeeping? I think that is everything. In which case, I will let you carry on with your days. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you for all of your efforts, and see you in Newport, and hopefully, if not in Newport, some other time and place soon. Thank you.